In 1989. He began his career here as assistant to the village manager, was promoted to assistant manager and deputy manager before becoming manager. He received an undergraduate degree from the University of Chicago and an MPA from the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University. Since retiring in 2009, John teaches local government management at the University of Illinois Chicago and consults through the Center for Government Studies at Northern Illinois University. He wrote Blueprint for Building Community, Leadership Insights for Good Government in 2010. During his service in Woodridge, the community was named 100 Best Places to Live by Money Magazine and the World's Greatest Community Midwest by the World's Greatest TV Show. Park Forest was named an All-America City and was a special mention recipient in that contest during his service here. He has a long list of impressive credentials, and I'm going to put a copy of that on the display table so you can see what those are. And finally, John can speak.
Thank you, Jane. I guess this is Mike, so you can hear me. Okay. I'm very pleased to be here today. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And there are a lot of people to keep me honest. Certainly a lot of folks that I knew in Park Forest and some friends from Woodridge who have some roots in the south suburbs who have come here today as well. So please, I'm going to hopefully have some time for questions, so hopefully we'll have a chance to get to that. When I came to Park Forest, in 1972, I was 23, my wife was 21. We thought it was a little expensive to move in Arbor Trails, so probably like many of you, we decided it was a good idea to move into the co-ops. And we had a great time, our first 5 years in Park Forest in the co-ops. A number of other milestones for our family, our first home. Like many other people, aspiring folks, on Central Park, we found a home on Western Drive, which is a great place, and we had our two sons here in Park Forest, and they started their daycare at Trinity Lutheran, and one went to Dogwood for a little bit, and the other one started at Beacon Hill. So we had some very memorable experiences and some milestones. We have maybe not perfect logistics today, so periodically I'm going to lean over and try to move my slides here. For those of you who can see, I am going to talk primarily about my book and share some excerpts from time to time. I'm a reluctant author because I was a village manager, a village administrator. I didn't necessarily expect to write a book. But I retired and my son needed a little tending, so he was finishing his academic career for veterinary school down in St. Kitts in the Caribbean. So I shared the first 14 weeks of retirement in the Caribbean, but I couldn't drive and I was pretty sedentary, so I quickly figured out after working 6 and 7 days, dawn to dusk, for as long as I did, I needed some activity, so I decided it was time to write that book that I was encouraged to do, and I did so. My public service career was exciting. It was a great journey, and I wrote the book because I had a few things to say. I also had a lot of people that were special along the way that I encountered, and I wanted to make sure this reflected a thank you for their education of me. And certainly, probably my greatest learning, since it was my first 17 years in public management, was in Park Forest. I probably learned here more than I did in Woodridge. I had an opportunity to apply it in Woodridge, but I'm going to try and focus on some of those activities in Park Forest that helped me grow and develop as a person interested in public service. And let me turn to a piece of the book. We've already heard mention of a guy named Barney Cunningham, so this is another little Barney Cunningham story. My first day on the job as a full-time professional was January 31, 1972. As assistant to the manager, I was assigned the task of drafting the annual report of the mayor or village president. I'm not so sure which one you go by, John. Is it mayor or village president? So same meeting. I reviewed the files for the prior reports, and I was intrigued, maybe awed is a better description, by the final paragraph in the 1970 report of B.G. Barney Cunningham. He quoted the oath of the Athenian city-state. We will strive increasingly to quicken the public's sense of civic duty. Thus, in all these ways, we will transmit this city not only not less, but greater and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us. This oath so reflected my motivation for entering the city management profession. The oath reflected my dreams for the work that I was beginning. In looking back, I'm inclined to interpret this first day experience as unfolding under a guiding hand or blessings from above. While I was a fan of Aristotle from college and the oath graced the wall of the Maxwell School at Syracuse, I had not previously seen this oath. It captured my motivation for seeking a career in public service. Literally, starting day one, I found my career choice reinforced, and I was captivated with trying to fulfill this oath. This next slide is a picture of the lobby of the Maxwell School. Lobby's on the first floor. Most of the classroom activity was on the third floor. I very seldom, if ever, stopped to pay attention to George Washington or the Athenian Oath in the lobby. Besides, it was my first year of being married, and I was in effect on my honeymoon in Syracuse. Last year, I was recognized as the MPA Alumni of the Year at the Maxwell School, and it's noted it is a school of citizenship, and that's a very important part of it. And as part of that citizenship, the graduating class is led by the MPA Alumni Awardee in the Athenian Oath. So I had the opportunity to attend really my first graduation at Syracuse and read the oath and lead the class in the oath. So it's been part of my life for a number of years. And let me just share another excerpt from the book that relates to that oath. The oath of the Athenian city-state echoes the call that we must still heed. We will fight for the ideals and sacred things of the city, both alone and with many. The obligation that we carry is to fight for the ideals and sacred things of the city. We must work to build communities that fulfill this charge. City managers sometimes get lost in the question of efficiency. Efficiency may be on the manager's list, but that is not where our work starts. Why we do the work of a city manager is to add purpose and meaning to the lives of people who come together in a community. Our purpose is the purpose of the people in our city. I felt certainly my park forest education and the opportunity to get involved in a real job started teaching me about citizenship and the important things that a community must do in order to build itself up, and certainly Park Forest was a great example. Let me share some perspectives on some of the values I consider important. And let me start in reverse order. There's three values, and let me start first with respect. Respect is the importance of including everybody and everybody having a role in building community. And that probably more than any value was one that was exhibited in Park Forest and became important because of what I saw in Park Forest and the commitment that people made here to why it's important to have everybody involved and to make sure that they're an integral part of building community. Integrity is one that's important to managers and one that managers attest to as the most important value because it lives out what is at the center of their professional code of ethics. The International City County Management Association requires people to be honest. But it's not simply a matter of being honest, it's a matter of making sure that you share information so that people can understand what it is happening in the community and what it is that needs to be done for that community to move forward. And probably the core value that I consider probably the most important, and maybe takes a little leap, literally a leap of faith, is trust and faith. And that is one that's very important on my list, and probably I put at the top of the list. And let me share what I said in the book about this important core value. Trust and faith begins from within and is learned and acquired as one grows up. Belief in one's own goodness is essential to having trust and faith in others. The manager needs to have trust and faith in order to take ownership for his actions. This basic value will help convey the passion and importance of the work to those surrounding the manager. Trust and faith extends in many other directions. Each day we need to convey the importance of our work, especially to employees, through whom we work to care for the needs of the community. We need to believe that they have a similar view of the community and have the same trust and faith in their work efforts. We need to put our trust and faith in those employees and their commitment to this important work, as well as their ability to make outstanding contributions to the community. The manager is doing this important community work through the trust and faith that the community has placed in the manager through the elected officials. The trust and faith that the mayor and the board placed in me was extended through the organization and community. These are all important values, I think, exhibited in Park Forest, and certainly were ones that I may have had internally when I came here, but they were reinforced, clarified, and built on by the experiences I had in Park Forest. One of the things that Bob Pierce, who we'll talk about in a minute, regularly did was participate in the National Municipal League and the National Civic League. Both those organizations have been responsible for a long time for supporting managerial form of government, but also supporting the All-America City Award and some of the values that citizens are required to have. Now, Bob would, and I'm sure John Joyce saw it, he's with me here today as my chief book publicist. Bob Pierce would circulate the National Civic League magazines, and we would all try to digest what was in there and try to practice that. And that was an important part of the kind of environment that we saw in Park Forest as we were building our community. And let me just for a second try to give you a brief summary of building community, and I'll talk about some of those connections. Building community is connecting elected officials, citizens, and employees to fulfill the needs and dreams of the residents in the community. And that's very much something that I tried to practice, certainly understood better as I went forward and learned, but that is what I came to see my job. Now, what did I do while I was in Park Forest? This is for me to answer. This is not for somebody who saw me work. As Jane suggested, I had a couple stints. The first stint, really the longest stint, was when I was an assistant to the manager, assistant manager, deputy manager, and acting manager. I needed a lot of practice before I could get that top job. And it was probably appropriate. I had a lot of learning to do. I was involved in 11 years in that area, and that was my learning ground. I was also probably in a transitional phase. Most of my predecessors as assistants to the manager stayed 2 years, and somehow they went off and they were great managers elsewhere, or maybe they weren't so good managers or didn't last too long. But they only stayed about 2 years, so that was a little unusual for me to stay a long time. But that seemed very normal to me, and I felt I had a lot to learn. And what did I do during that time? A lot of the work I did, especially the first 5 years, was focused on the employees. And the employees were a great source of learning, a great source of encouragement, because to some extent I gave them an ear, and they were available to absorb some ideas that I may have had, and we had a very good relationship in terms of what we were able to accomplish. But I had to involve myself in that because Bob Pierce was not the kind of manager that kind of gave you direction and you had 1, 2, 3 things on your list every morning. And let me share what I noted in the book about my relationship and some of the experiences with Bob Pierce. By great luck and the grace of God, I started my career as assistant to the village manager in Park Forest. My new boss was Bob Pierce, an Oklahoma-educated MPA with 20 years experience, the last 10 years in Park Forest. He was from the, quote, old school, unquote, emphasizing the role of the manager, especially in the Illinois statutory form. Despite the authority of the manager's role, he realized that this is democratic government and emphasized its supremacy. Above all, he realized that the one element that distinguished the form and the manager occupying the position is an absolute commitment to personal integrity and the manager's support for honest and open governance of the community and all its stakeholders. Part of his old school philosophy was that he hired department managers and let them do their job. Although Bob Pierce was old school, he had openness to innovation and cutting-edge community programs, like supporting racial integration, youth and health services. These programs were not the mainstay of municipal activities anywhere in 1970. My landing in Park Forest was another stroke of good fortune. I landed in my first community, but not an ordinary community. This community definitely had its own personality and character. A community like each person wants to be recognized for its individuality, what it stands for, and what it wants to ideally become. The history of Park Forest was a tribute to its uniqueness. Of course, I had the opportunity to learn that with Bob Pierce, and it took me a long time to realize that he didn't give me those jobs every morning that I should be doing, that I'm going to have to learn that independence and initiative was an important ingredient. And as noted, there were a couple other things on my list of assistant activities that got me involved in a whole new realm and probably taught me a great deal about leadership and being at the helm as a village manager before I got that opportunity. One of the things that was a result of my employee activity was the discussion of labor relations and the state considering maybe having a labor relations law that was going to require collective bargaining. And as a result, I got involved with a number of other communities to try and develop some resources and some perspective on what that meant and what we had to learn in order to effectively do that job. Costs were also much more an issue in the late 70s. The economy was not so strong, so insurance costs were skyrocketing. So I was able to get together, and in fact was the only South-Suburban participant in helping form the Intergovernmental Risk Management Agency. So I had the opportunity as the assistant who didn't have too much direction, but was given the opportunity, and there was some innovativeness on the part of the boss to become involved in a couple areas. And that certainly helped me and speaks so well of the fact that Bob Pierce helped give me opportunities that were going to be important in my future career. What lessons that I take away? Just quickly, team is critical. I would have loved to have more interaction and networking and brainstorming and kind of problem solving at the team level. We didn't have many opportunities for that when we pretty much had to do it on a one-on-one or one-on-two basis and learn from each other, but not so much in a group setting. So team became more important as I moved forward as to how I would consider that issue. Communication is obviously important to that, and it's not only communication with the team, but it's communication with the larger group of employees. One of the things that I learned during that time, and I have to share it because it's an important consideration, is to establish a positive self-fulfilling prophecy. And certainly that was something that was important to how Park Forest tried to address various issues, especially some difficult issues, and it had some great people here to help guide the way. And let me share another little excerpt that relates to that positive self-fulfilling prophecy. In Park Forest, I had the pleasure and opportunity to work with two other assistants to the village manager who had extraordinary talent and ability. One headed the youth service function, and the other was responsible for human and community relations. The assistant for community relations, who often found himself at the point of conflict and controversy, repeatedly tried to guide and lead by emphasizing the positive result that people working together could accomplish. He constantly talked about the positive self-fulfilling prophecy. I watched and learned in Park Forest from his regular application of this principle, and with many small groups and always in difficult situations. Individuals, teams, and organizations have a positive self-fulfilling prophecy in order to guide their actions. Not to digress, but Don DeMarco, who was one of those assistants, and Gary Leofani was another one, were extraordinary professionals. And John Joyce, who has proven himself right up to recent history, and Mike Cap, some of these folks were probably the best in their professional functional categories of anybody in the country. And it was a great opportunity to have them to learn from and to kind of see how they developed some of their own functions and interacted. And it's also a tribute to Bob Pierce, who I think is probably not sufficiently recognized for the work he did to bring those kind of people to this community and to establish the base that you continue to enjoy today because of that. Okay, eventually, it's about December 1 or so of 1982, I became acting manager. Another 5 months after that, became manager, and had a number of specific things that I faced, and I just wanted to kind of run through a few of those so you had some sense of the context for where I was in history and some of the things you could either blame me for or otherwise. But here's a list of events. The first one on the list, Apache affirmative marketing. We had a home in Eastgate we wanted to sell, and I think Kathy Cardona McDonough, brought to me this affirmative marketing agreement. It was either my first or second day as acting manager. I said, John, we had this in this agreement, and we're supposed to do this and this. Okay, I signed it. And Barbara Moore knows the story better than I do. Shortly thereafter, I think the National Association of Realtors decided we and a lot of other folks were bad folks, and we started a long trek through the courts to determine what the municipal role was in supporting integration, supporting diversity. And it was a very interesting experience. Really didn't end till a couple of years after I got in Woodridge, but through a favorable Supreme Court decision. It's worth noting, I think, and kind of my looking back on this, that in 1983 I was vice president of IRMA. 1984 I was president. My first couple of years as the village manager in Park Forest. And IRMA was an important part of our developing a legal strategy and getting the resources to fight. And of course it was helpful that I was involved in IRMA and had that kind of opportunity in that environment from Bob Pierce that went back some years earlier that I just described. My first month as acting manager, we also finally decided we needed to do some water improvements, the standpipe, a line and a few other things, but we couldn't do that without money. So just being the kind of straightforward guy I was, we needed a 37% water rate increase. I didn't think it was a big, it was straightforward. We just, I just told her like it was. I learned a little later I could have probably done it a little bit more politic. And I learned some of that at time, but there was a lot of stuff to get done, and I didn't want to waste a lot of time. Aqua Center acquisition was a couple months later. I guess we learned that the Y was not going to open that year, and thanks to the efforts of John Joyce and Mike Cap, learning about the pipes, and great direction from the board, which was just go get it done. And some efforts through some of our regional contacts to make sure the Y would cooperate with us. We were able to put together a plan to acquire and get it open in time with spending a minimal amount of money. And it was one of the first big efforts that I was involved in directly, getting citizens and volunteers firsthand to try to chip in so we could make sure that we could get the job done as low cost as possible. Industrial park development came a couple of years after that, I think, through some combined strategies where we were able to get Lou Manilow Jr. to give us the land for back taxes, and we were able to then sell the land, pay for those back taxes. And we got a Build Illinois grant, the first round, in order to make sure that we had all the money, and that was another strategy of trying to move forward. Norwood redevelopment occurred. It's unfortunate it hasn't sustained itself. But we were able to put some bits and pieces together and accomplish that. And the plaza redevelopment, I think from 1970-something till when did Park Forest take over the property? It was about a 25-year span there where it was a real important element of village management in Park Forest. And I do tell the story in the book about the Marshall Fields dispute, and one of my better stories actually, but it was the most intense, strenuous, stressful 30 days that I ever spent, and I was really depressed when it all started off, but I do note in the story Matt, and I didn't remember his last name, Matt who moved into Park Forest to be near his grandkids, came into my office and was ready to throw the tea in the harbor. And after his soliloquy and great motivational speech, I was able to kind of get my act together and move forward. And all the staff people had some other ways. And the board people, I think Therese was one of the folks that made sure the buses got loaded. I think we had some ways to come together and change that, at least to be able to move forward for the next 10 years thereafter. So the time as manager was interesting, and I did learn some things during that time as well. PR, do good things and tell about it. That's also in the book, and I wanted to share that story because my staff in Woodridge, when I retired there, recognized me for, and this is one of John Perry's principles. Well, it wasn't really one, it was one I stole from Mort Kaplan and Associates back in '77 or so. And I don't tell the part in the book that I was proud when we were being asked to spend large sums of money for public relations. I was probably one rolling my eyes saying, yee. For one, it's hard to come up with the money because we always had to find ways to get the money, but I'm not so sure it was really valuable. But the principle I came back to many, it's kind of like was forced on me in my future career in public service, because it made so much sense. You got to tell people about the good things you do, otherwise who else is going to speak for you? So it is an important thing, and I took that away and kept preaching to my staff, even though I wasn't initially convinced of its cost effectiveness. Another lesson I learned was kind of stay in touch with reality. Maybe one of the things that took me the longest to learn in the management profession was try to separate your emotions and passions from the details of the subject matter, And I always kind of stay in touch with reality, and I do talk some about that in the book as to how I came to learn that lesson. But also rely upon the management team. In my last 25 years of service, it was the management team, particularly the folks that I was asking to go out and make their employees passionate and perform what the elected officials and citizens wanted. That was really the mainstay of my existence and what gave me encouragement, because so many of them are so good people, and we have people like Barbara Moore and John Joyce here today who were stalwarts in trying to lead their functional areas and their departments, and they really were the reason I could be encouraged and was continue to be encouraged, and still am encouraged about the value of public service. One of the points I make in the book is that employees are central. It's not that they're superior to citizens, not they're superior to elected officials, but just think about it. As manager, I might have had 10 conversations with people in the course of the day outside of Village Hall, or that had some orientation that was not amongst the employees, maybe not even that many. But if I had 100 employees and they had 10 conversations with people outside the organization, they had 100 times more impact than I did. And really, in order to be successful, especially since personnel is the biggest cost of municipal government, it's essential that we put our employees at the top of the list and make sure that they're motivated and effective and believe in the same things that all the other leaders in the organization believe in. And that really causes me to turn to mission and values. What I saw during my career in public service was an extensive and a very sincere commitment to employees who had some kind of positive self-fulfilling prophecy they wanted to fulfill. And not only that, but they had a bigger mission, a sense of the global mission, the mission of the community that they wanted to fulfill as well. And I could always rely upon them to magnify the efforts and really put my trust and faith in them to carry forward the mission of the organization. In order to bring everyone together, it's really got to learn about engaging the community, and that is a lot of what the book is about, because more and more public business is about community engagement. First engaging the manager, engaging with the elected officials, and them kind of working jointly to engage the employees, and then all the citizens. And it really takes some understanding. Number of things that during my career I practiced here first in Park Forest and learned in Park Forest, was able to do in Woodridge as well, and all kinds of things had to be continued or have to be continued in the community to continue to keep everybody on the same page and keep people moving forward. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but that list is long. Neighborhood dialogue was one we called in Woodridge, but I think the first and most memorable neighborhood dialogue was the engagement of some of the Illinois folks, Illinois school folks in that area over curfew issues and some park vandalism issues. And certainly there are a lot of experiences that I've had in life with a number of things. Annual citizen survey, I was fortunate in getting to Woodridge, finding that they had done it, and it is now about the longest annual citizen survey of its kind in the country, because they've been doing it almost 3 decades. But there are a lot of value in trying to stay in touch with the citizens and to trying to find ways to engage them so they can also engage you and give you some insight into what's important for the community. And again, that's all for the purpose of connecting elected officials, citizens, and employees to fulfill the needs and dreams of the community. And let me just turn Here's a picture of the Agents for Change. I consider this one of the better examples of citizen engagement and some of the principles I talk about in the book. The picture here is from a couple activities in Woodridge, and let me kind of go through the story real quickly. These people came together, Agents for Change, because a police officer who kind of had a sense of what he wanted to accomplish to do a better policing job, made contact with one of the ladies in the picture. One of the ladies expressed some concerns. Police officer went back to the police chief, went back to the village administrator. We engaged the mayor, who had some special community funds of his own, and we indicated support for these folks. The Agents for Change went out and with support, but not with a lot of commitment, village employee activity, went out and did double Dutch contests, community-wide 3-on-3 basketball tournaments, various kind of meets and greets in the park to gain information from youth and their parents. And actually the lady in the right side, for those who can see it, there's a lady in that picture who was so enamored with her participation in the process. She volunteered to serve on the village board when there was an appointment opportunity. I think she is now serving her third term on the village board. But it's really a good example of how you translate kind of employee commitments and them having a personal mission and a personal positive self-fulfilling prophecy to something that serves the entire community and adds to the way the community addresses its issues. And of course, there's certainly one thing that Park Forest, I think, stands out for more than just about anything else, and that's its commitment to integration, diversity, and respecting and including folks in all walks of life. And this is a picture of the Woodridge diversity quilt, and which was done by the school kids as part of the 50th anniversary. And it must have a lot into it, not all of which I recognize what all the symbols stand for, but you know, Woodridge is a community that has 10% at least African American, 10% Latino, significant Indian population, Asian population, and it just got a diverse group. And I brought some students, Chinese students from UIC there a couple of years ago. They saw this quilt, and right away they recognized some Chinese symbol that I was not aware of, but it really reflects that diversity. But another element I was thinking of, when you make an effort, when you make a commitment to have an important purpose in life, you don't, you know, community building we see, and maybe I'm even talking about it as one community, but what you don't see is how that extends beyond your community and how you've had an impact beyond your own community. Some of you know that, but I put this slide up particularly because there are some little side stories. The side story of the week is the new police chief in Woodridge is Ray Giannatta's niece, a female police chief, who greeted me when I came to Woodridge. But she was high on Uncle Ray, but there are all those little side stories. But the diversity quilt also reflects things like the first mayor of Woodridge, when I came to town, talked to me about one of his old friends and some of the things he did because he had conversations with that old friend Henry Deach. And some of the things they did in Woodridge to reflect their commitment to open housing and diversity. And he took that from Henry Deach. Or the diversity quilt does not outwardly reflect the fact that Woodridge was successful in encouraging positive multifamily areas because people like Barbara Moore and John and a few other folks I called on when I left Park Forest came and helped us to to understand some of the tools that we might use to make our community more effectively a diverse and sustainable community. So there are a lot of things behind the scenes that you would not normally recognize as the contributions of Park Forest, but they certainly exist much wider than first meets the eye. And let me close, because I'd like to take any questions. Let me close with, it's always kind of personal in the end, and I kind of put my own personal ending on the book, but it also relates to one of my Park Forest experiences. And it's about my dad, who I describe as quiet and not too forthcoming in terms of his opinions, at least about some of his family members. Maybe not supportive in the way I would like, but he was a good dad and gave me all the opportunities. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. But let me take this excerpt. During his visit to Park Forest, we went to the local jewel store to pick up a few groceries. I am the family shopper, continue to be. As we went through the store, I greeted the employees at the deli and the meat area. I encountered several residents as we walked the aisles, to which I introduced my dad. As we exited, I met another resident who had a more detailed inquiry. I finished with the resident and walked with my dad to the car. As we got in the car, he looked at me and with a definite look of satisfaction said, quote, "This is just like Two Rivers, you know everyone," close quote. Ever since I have taken that moment as the affirmation of my life's work, his comment meant that building community and a place to carry out life's purpose, the ideal and sacred things of the city, is a dream worth pursuing. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and thank you for the opportunity of once again serving Park Forest. Thank you.